Hello, everyone. This is Anthony with the Dragons of Victory. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Cade Hansen. His YouTube handle is Gay X Trad Speaks, and he's sort of a newer voice. We're all pretty new voices in terms of people who are going online, talking about their experience in trad Catholicism, sharing their stories. And Cade's been on Kevin's show, and in a short time, his channel's already gotten a very respectable amount of traffic and likes and followers and whatnot. And this is just more effort to hear his story and support him and support all of us. So thank you, Cade. If you could just introduce yourself. A lot of people probably already saw your previous interviews, but for anyone who's fresh, if you could just give us a quick Cliff Notes version of your background to get everyone oriented here.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a culturally Catholic household, or as Catholics would call it, a cafeteria Catholic household. Went to church occasionally, mainstream parish. Didn't really believe anything the church had to offer. But as I went through the confirmation process, entered high school, I was like, I should probably investigate the claims of the church, and started reading my way into the church. A lot of Aquinas, a lot of more traditional authors, and moved from being a pretty secular teen to becoming very Catholic and then becoming a traditional Catholic. Very much a fan of the FSSP and the Latin Mass, and spent from about ninth grade until 2 or 3 years into college in the traditional movement. Was discerning the priesthood, was discerning monastic life, did a lot of Catholic apologetics, and converted a number of friends, even though I was going to a public high school. But as I left college to drop out to grow my company, started really reevaluating the claims of the church and seeing that the level of belief that I had did not match the level of evidence that I had, and slowly deconverted over the process of about a year and a half. And now I've been completely out of traditional Catholicism for about also a year and a half, and live a pretty awesome life here in Colorado.
Right on, man. Right on. Thank you so much for sharing that, and uh, keep it up, man. Keep up the good work for sure. Cade also is a videographer, and I'll make sure to link to both of his channels in the description here when all's said and done. You can see you can see him speaking out about his past as well as support him in his professional work. So a big reason I wanted to talk to you, Cade, is you are part of the LGBT community, and I am not. Although there was a time when I thought, well, my sexual ethic has been so. When I realized how screwed up it had been, I did sort of a full on evaluation of deep dive of myself, and when wondering if maybe I did have these, maybe this was in me, and I just suppressed it so much. But I'm pretty at this point settled in my sexual identity, but the degree that because there was never growing up everything I've spoken out about, all the what I've categorized as sexual abuse. And real quick, I just want to make this point here because obviously accusing anyone or labeling any kind of behavior as sexually abusive is very loaded, and you have to really understand what you mean when you say that. And for the longest time, I simply couldn't think. I wasn't able to think of what I endured, and I'll say what you endured as well as sexual abuse because it didn't involve any physical contact. It wasn't like this priest touched me inappropriately, but the the psychological warfare that they engage in, especially in the privacy of the confessional and on the pulpit as well, they're warped, antiquated, perverted. I very much think that the Catholic Church's sexual ethic is ultimately perverted. I think it ultimately came from one screwed up guy, Paul, who I think was a total fraud. Maybe he was either a fraud or crazy or both. And I think Jesus. I don't think he was God. I think he had a lot more good things to say and a lot more good ideas. And I think that so much of Christianity, of the church, was just completely taken over by people like Paul, claiming to speak for Jesus, even though he'd never met him, met the man, in person. And yeah, the people who were actually writing things down, the people who were like doing all the organizational work, created this monstrosity, all under the name of this guy Jesus, who um, was probably a cool guy, by and large, from everything we know about him. It's so much worse for anyone in the LG. Let me just make this point. I have been told by professionals that, in the mental health field, that what I endured in terms of being told to kneel, physically hurt myself, to expel sexual thoughts, to have this, to constantly be in this freaked out mindset whenever it came to anything sexual, to not really allow any of that, to any education of sexual things in a healthy, positive way at all. It's still affecting my life, it's still affecting my life very profoundly. But I can only imagine how much worse it would be for anyone like you in the LGBT community. There were definitely a couple kids I knew who were very deep in the closet, who, I hope are living good lives now. Now that they're out, I check in on them on social media occasionally. But yeah, if you could just speak to that, um, all uh, all sexual, the whole thing obviously is twisted and perverted, but there's just this special kind of reaction or attitude they have toward homosexuality. They call it cries out to heaven for vengeance. Who are you taking revenge out on? Like who? Uh, if you could just speak to more of that, your own personal experience in regards to that whole aspect of it, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, so in Catholicism, the big thing dealing with same-sex attraction is basically divorcing one's experience from one's identity. So they'll always say things along the lines of, "You're not gay; you experience same-sex attraction," or "This isn't part of your identity; this is just part of your experience." But what I think gets missed a lot is that when our entire experience of something is the lens through which we filter an entire religion, I don't know how we don't call that an identity. And so for straight people, the church has this crazy sexual ethic, which is very repressive, which is very problematic, which can become abusive, all of these things. But at the end of the day, there's still some sort of this innate desire is still somewhat good, is still ordered towards things. We might have to like take off the base layers, or we might have to direct it in a new way. But at the end of the day, you're like, oh, and here's a solution, which is like you can get married to somebody of the opposite sex. Even if you're sitting in the moment, there's still a direction to orient. Versus for people that are queer, there's no direction, there's no solution, there's no this is somewhat good, there's no like this could be turned good. It's all bad. And not only is it all bad, but when it's something that you'll go through your entire life with that particular experience, with that particular identity, um, you can't help but see yourself as bad. And when your innate attractions that you don't control are something that either makes your life almost unbearable, having to live in the closet for the rest of your life, or get married to the opposite partner, the Catholic Church doesn't have solutions when it comes to what to do about your same-sex attraction. It's just
Right.
shut up and carry your cross, and you're going to be fine. Because at the end of the day, at least you'll have heaven. And everything, especially in same-sex attraction, is like, how do we just like get this life more or less over with so that we can get to heaven and be free from this particular burden?
Right.
I think
Right.
especially for people who, luckily, I didn't grow up in the traditional Catholic movement, but when the people that I've talked to that were born in that group and they've never seen the outside world, and every mention of homosexuality is accompanied by disgust, you obviously turn that inwards and see yourself as disgusting when every mention of your experience is lumped into something disgusting. Um, People have no other option but to hate themselves when that's all they know. Luckily for me, when I was growing up, I grew up in a pretty secular family, and so being gay wasn't anything terrible, was just never really spoke of, and so I was never comfortable in my identity. But as I went into the Catholic Church, you go from like liberal Catholics who might support like gay marriage or are kind of like lax on those particular rules, and as you get further into the traditional Catholic pipeline, it goes from like, oh, you experience same-sex attraction, but it's not sinful, to like, well, actually, they're completely disordered and you can change them, and there's something completely broken about you. Unless you can change it, you're not going to be holy enough. And really, for you to be single for the rest of your life is still a defect, because you're not, you don't have a vocation, or you're not living out a vocation. It's, you're never going to become virtuous because you have nothing to sacrifice for, like a spouse or being a priest. Um, all to say, it's incredibly confusing. There's no good solutions, and all of the language for people becomes internalized, and people hate themselves near universally for being queer.
Exactly. Exactly to all of that. It's you know, the whole structure of it is precipitated that we are doing God's will. This comes from God. This is what God wants us to do. And so you can you can get around so much um experiencing of, not just for in your own life, but if knowing people around you who are LGBT, you can justify so much that's done to them um by associating the messenger, the person who's giving you these teachings that homosexuality is wrong, it's bad for you. I'm still very much aware, or at least I try to always emphasize this, that in their minds, to some degree, no justification, of course, but in their minds, in all groups like this, it very much ties into um, the situation of when you're a child and you don't want to do something, but your parents make you do it, and then you go like, oh, that was cool, and it's, and that whenever you have an experience like that, I think it downloads into your brain um, an attitude of like, oh, they're this person, my parents are always right. That's the feeling you have as a kid, almost. I mean, a lot of the times, growing up, you feel like your parents know everything, and for your parents, their feeling of who their parents are, aside from their own parents, is the church. The church becomes your the idea, of course, that the creator of the universe is knows your name, knows your thoughts, cares about you, wants to bring you up to bring you home to him. You can you tap into that parent, making their kids eat broccoli, making them take that swim class, making you tap into that cycle or those memories to justify everything that's done. So in the mindset of all these people, if they have a family, or if they have a child in traditional Catholicism and Mormons, other groups like this, if they have a child or a loved one dealing with same-sex attraction, um, so much of the time, I really, I their intentions may be pure as the driven snow, but the what is so necessary is just to break through the you know wi- make them goddamn prove it, make them goddamn um put up, without any shadow of a doubt, beyond any reasonable doubt, make them prove why this moral framework is the right one, and why it's justified for LGBT people to go through so much suffering to undo whatever is wrong with them, in order to you know in order to enter into the Christian life or whatever. And so much of the time, when you get into these questions of why do you believe this, and theological questions, almost across the board, you can have all of the debates about evidence and science and all that, but eventually, 100%, all these people with these faiths will get to the point where they say, there's things I just can't explain, there's things I just don't quite understand, but I'm taking all of this, I'm just sort of like humbly accepting, because they're trying to get into that obedient framework that they had as a child, and the memory of when I trusted my parent, it was right in the end, and so they're doing that with the church. But when you actually, really examine where all these sexual teachings come from, I mentioned earlier, I've said before, Jesus says basically one very little about sex in general. He says something along the lines, he says something like, if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. That's pretty much, that's almost it in terms of speaking of anything sexually. He doesn't mention LGBT at all. Paul is the guy who goes on a roll about all this stuff. If it was so important, wouldn't that have been something Jesus would have led with? But they treat it as they in traditional Catholicism and other groups like that, sexual deviancy, quote unquote, and by extension, LGBT is like the main problem in society. It's like the biggest problem. The reason the reason there's chaos around the world is we're all screwing whatever whoever we want, and we're not, and we're doing it with multiple people instead of one person for life. And so I don't know if you could speak to your understanding of the church's history and stuff. Where do you come from in terms of your understanding of how these ideas developed, why this stuff is in there in the first place? I don't know if you have anything you want to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the development of why the church teaches what it teaches is a very contentious topic. But when we look at the sexual ethics of the time period in which Christianity originated, most of sexual ethics was seen as property disputes, as a way of marking your particular property, as inheritance when it comes to having children. And it wasn't based around how do we protect people, how do we gauge consent, how do we build fair legal structures, how do we allow people to have freedom in their choice. That wasn't a consideration when it comes to Christian sexual ethics. A lot of it comes down to this is my wife or my property, or especially in the Older Testament, I have a number of different wives, all as my property. And especially homosexuality in that time period was seen as wrong, not because there was something wrong about the acts, but because a man was taking the woman or the role of a woman, and that was seen as degrading. So it's a very interesting like dichotomy when we get into these early first century sexual ethics are like being gay is wrong, not because it's two consenting adults and there's something intrinsically wrong about that, but that a man should play one particular role in sexual ethics to mark his territory, and it's wrong for a man to take the other position. And then also from a inheritance perspective, especially as we get into the medieval time period, we look at things like priestly celibacy and how do we go about adjudicating things as like marriage is a property, it's an inheritance, it's how we track things through society. That's why we have things like arranged marriages, and even into the 19th to 20th century, a lot of the sexual ethics surrounds like how do we make sure we know whose child is which? How do we make sure which children get what particular piece of property? It's not really until the last 100 years or so where marriage is like, oh, you choose somebody because you want to be with them for the rest of your life. And I think a lot of trads take this for granted. They talk a lot about dating and finding the most virtuous woman. And you rewind 500 years ago, and that's not how they did marriage. It was like, this is the person you're going to marry. End of story. This is the inheritance. This is seen, I mean, especially by Paul, as like, we have the kingdom is coming. And so, like, well, if you really got to have sex, you might as well just like get married. But like, really, if you were really involved in this and see that Christ is coming back soon, you'd give it and forsake everything just to be with God because he's coming soon. And after I think a few dozen years, especially the first few 100 years, people are like, oh, maybe Jesus isn't coming back tomorrow. Maybe we can have normal lives. And how do we integrate this old sexual ethic with these property ethics, with these ideas of sexual ethics, combine that all into church teaching, and then try to reverse engineer that with Aristotelian philosophy, with scripture, and just make stuff up wholesale. And especially when we get into like
Absolutely.
biblical teachings on sexuality, I think the most telling thing is that Protestants and Catholics and even Orthodox all disagree on their sexual ethics, and they all claim the Bible as and the Bible or a divine nature or the true philosophy to guide their sexual ethic. And even then, they still can't agree on things. Catholics can't even agree on natural family planning type of issues. And so I always like to say, like, until religion can give us some really solid answers that everybody agrees on, I'm not going to side with a fraction of a percentage of the world as like this is the truth. So once religion can come back with a coherent ethic and agree on things and be able to actually propose things in unison, it's not something that I'm super interested in talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. That's an important point you made about all the early church writings, especially Paul. For me, the apocalypse was imminent to them. It's so clear in Paul's writings that he thinks that Jesus is coming in his lifetime. This is all very very like on the horizon, and yeah, that Paul's you know Paul seemed to, he said like, yeah, get married if you want, I guess. He said that line about that. But it's better to. It seems like the again, there's debate about Jesus himself being celibate. With the whole idea with him and Mary Magdalene. I obviously growing up just would recoil instantly at any suggestion of that, and I haven't, and since leaving and since shedding that I haven't done a deep enough dive into that to think whether I think there's any legitimacy to that, to the idea that Jesus wasn't celibate. But that idea is coming from like, well, we need to make ourselves as much like Jesus as much as possible in preparing for the imminent end times. And it's the structure is undeniably hierarchical with the men above the women. And I think that that is a very important reason why there's such an enmity and hatred toward LGBT, within that system, because it ruins that whole, it immediately gets that whole structure out of whack where the man dominates the woman. That's how it's going to be. Well, what if the man wants to be with another man? What if this woman wants to be with another woman? That whole on top hierarchical structure is immediately destroyed. And of course, this is all the hierarchy, the authority is the cornerstone, the idea of this is passed down from the highest source. This is us lowly beings need to understand that we have to utterly submit and utterly open our minds and utterly receive without any cautiousness, without any curiosity, all the information we're receiving from the source. And that idea is just stuck in there. It's just fixed, and that's what tradition is, right? It's lock and load. It's tradition is dogma. Hold, this is the case no matter what, and that is in no way in any other context in life how you should go about living. If you took a week at film school, just for example, for you, if you went to film school for 1 week and uh or no, let's say this is a better example. Say you're a silent filmmaker, and you're like in Singing in the Rain, they introduced talking into the movies, and the whole industry got screwed up. All these people who were silent film actors couldn't handle the change of technology. And with the 20th century, every decade has seen a radical change in the environment around us in terms of technology and culture. And so the only consistent thing about nature is that it changes. That change is the only, and the only way to live well, I think, is to, like Bruce Lee said, be like water, to learn how to adapt, to flow, to harden yourself when necessary, but be to have a fluid kind of experience of life, because you have to be receptive to new information. You have to be receptive to new data, to block yourself off willingly from the acknowledgement that from any information that might contradict your idea, with a thin veneer that you're open to new information. That is damnable. That is morally wrong. And I was important to say at the beginning that there's no bad intention with these people. They think they're just obeying their parent, their spiritual parent, God. But at the end of the day, they're listening to men. They're listening to men 2,000 years ago who were wrong about things. And you bring this up too. Sometimes you'll say, "Well, Paul said this. That's kind of screwed up." Even in traditional Catholicism, sometimes there'll be a sort of timid acknowledgement of that, but they'll say things like, well, you got to take the culture into account. You got to understand the time period, like slavery. Yeah, they had slaves, but everyone had slaves then. But then they'll look around at the outside, like the outside world is so evil, and the culture is so bad, and they should just do exactly what we're doing. What happened to cultural context there? What happened to why can't traditional Catholics be like, yeah, culturally LGBT is accepted, and they don't have that kind of attitude of like, oh, it was so awful, the slavery back then. It's just sort of like, yeah, slavery, they did that. What are you gonna do? That's really the attitude they have with that kind of stuff. So it's a very, very clear contradiction in approach, and it's a very clear double standard. I don't know if you had anything to say about that, about the double binds and the contradictions, and they approach one issue this way, but another issue differently, even though they shouldn't. Just
Yeah, I mean, the Catholic approach, especially when it comes to homosexuality, is perhaps akin to when you talk to Latter-day Saints about why can't you drink coffee, and they're going to come with like a few reasons or maybe a study that coffee can be addicting. But at the end of the day, it's because they think God said so. They can bring some objections, but we tend to laugh at them. They're like, or a secular person's going to laugh, or even a Catholic's going to laugh at like, so you're just doing this because God told you so, and it's not intuitive, it's not based on anything, it's not correlated to other moral frameworks. It's just like this random teaching that you kind of throw into the middle, but you got to uphold to be a good Latter Day Saint. I think in the same way that when you really grill Catholics on homosexuality, to your point, there's maybe these vague allusions to study here or there, but they're not really interested in that. And then maybe there's some like word games or semantics that they'll play, and then you kind of get them and really nail them down. And it's like, well, it's really just because God said so. And we can't question that. We can't reinterpret that. We can't weigh that against new evidence. To your point, and like I said on Kevin's stream, I think we can compare it in a similar way to like veganism, where if somebody comes up to a masculine traditional Catholics and says you should be vegan, they're going to go and then want to hear more. And if you're like, oh, I'm just vegan because I want to, it's like, cool. Like you're said, like you're not wanting to enforce. You don't really need evidence. You just don't want to eat meat and dairy. Then if you're like, I'm vegan and this is my experience, it's like, oh, you should probably have kind of your testimony to back up that particular statement. But then I'm vegan and you should consider it. It's like, we're going to want to see some serious evidence because a lot of people value eating meat and dairy in their diets. And then if you take that a step further of like, you should be vegan and we should make veganism illegal or not part of our mainstream legal system. You're like, dang, that's going to be a huge barrier. And then to say like veganism is the ultimate truth in life, you'd be like, holy crap, we're going to need a lot of evidence to see. And that's part of my journey out of traditional Catholicism is like when we look at homosexuality as this unchanging teaching that if you hold hands with somebody or you get into any sort of relationship or anything outside of church teaching, you're getting sent directly to hell, no questions asked. It's like that's a really high bar. And when the evidence is down here, some word games, and you want me to faith my way from like 1% evidence to 100% faith or 100% confidence, I'm just not willing to make that large of a sacrifice. It'd be like somebody saying, oh, you need to be vegan and we need to make eating meat illegal because here's like a 2 sentence like word game. You go, this is the dumbest thing on planet Earth. And I think in the same way, when it comes to
yeah,
homosexuality, there's no evidence. No evidence could ever change their mind, and really it's just faith at the end of the day. And it's not even faith that's in their personal lives, it's faith they want to enforce on society, something that they want to force on society that leads to death, to suffering, to people not living normal, happy, healthy lives, and something that they also want enshrined in the law for everybody to follow, even non-Catholics. It's such a staggeringly high claim to make without a single shred of evidence besides word games and because God told me so at the end of the day.
yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that God didn't say shit. This is, Jesus had hands. He never picked up a pen and wrote anything down. That would be according to literally God speaking, right? We have to rely on all these secondhand accounts of people who, and all the Gospels were written by people who uh, I know there's scholarly debate, but they were written like 60 years or so after Jesus's death, and it's all, when they're presenting these teachings and commenting about, the culture and everything, it's all the environment is created is also like, oh, this is like, I can still remember that the feeling of frustration of like, why doesn't everyone get it? Like, the truth of the faith, it's like so clear, it's so obvious. Um, and then and then when I had my leaving the faith, I kind of had a period where I stopped considering myself traditional, but I still wanted to be Catholic. And so I just started to assume, okay, well, the trad attitude is wrong, but like the teachings are still true. It's just they're totally presenting them in a really screwed up way, and they're overbearing, and they're just crazy. And then when I started shedding their attitudes and their approach to evangelism, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to look at the evidence. I wanted to be a Catholic YouTuber. I wanted to like debate people and convince them that Catholicism was true. And so I started on all this personal research, and the research um, made me ultimately lose my faith. I was watching, I was like hate watching. I was watching the other side, and slowly but surely I was just more and more unable to develop responses. And it was really what did it for me was the loss of the emotional connection, the loss of the feeling that um, this was my parent, that this, because you feel when you're in that environment, and especially in trad Catholicism, and you really do feel a presence. You really do feel like you're hearing like thoughts you're getting, or words being said to you, when the atmosphere, it's creating the environment, and they're saying these things, and they're, and the repetition, and the it's just you know brain science, that certain hypnotism, right? Your environment. It's why we go to concerts. It's why we go see movies. Where when we go see a movie or a play, or a concert, whatever, we're aware we're entering some sort of fantasy. We're willingly entering into a world that's been specifically created by somebody else, and we're going to experience that world for a short amount of time, with the understanding that we're going to go back to our normal lives later. But in high control groups like this, um, the the experience becomes like you it's like watching a movie, and then like because living and thinking you're living inside the movie, um, and you see fandoms, fandoms of certain franchises uh, kind of become little cults. It's the same kind of human psychology, and so again, the thing a lot of us have to understand, and it's really frustrating and it's hard to finagle, is that we all have emotional needs. We all need security. We all need a safe place to land. We all need sort of like something in our difficult moments in life. We need a bed we can think of at the end of the night that we're going to be in, a person we're going to see at the end of the day, an environment, a familiar structure we're going to return to after we're done dealing with life's bullshit. And when you're asking somebody to question the beliefs of a certain religion or faith or group, you're asking them ultimately to leave, destroy that, and just sort of go out into the wilderness alone, emotionally, psychologically. That's horrifying, and so many people would rather just hold on to, it's all going to be okay in the end. When I die, I'll go to heaven. It'll all be good then. My gay son, my gay brother, my relationship with them is tough right now, but it'll all be good. Like I'll pray for them, and they'll, and I'll pray for you, and that just instantly solves the problem. The difficult thing for me in all of this has been under, understanding when I'm getting to the point with someone where they are maybe willingly or not, acknowledging the suspension of their critical faculties, acknowledging the suspension of how you normally look at things in life to make decisions, because the idea of separating themselves from this cocoon is just too traumatic and too devastating, and often it would be. I'm so grateful that I came out of this with my relationship with my parents still intact. They were genuinely horrified at uh, a lot of the things I went through, and we're good now. It was rough, but we're good now, and I'm so that still. I mean, it really the reason it took so long for me to fully come to terms with this was the fear of the ramifications throughout my family. But it all came together. But for so many people out there, so many people might be watching this, that wouldn't be the case. It would, they would be out in the wilderness. They would be out of their cocoon, out in the snowy tundra without the other penguins. So, from your perspective, what could you say to somebody out there who is confronting this dilemma?
Yeah. I think one of the things that Catholicism always talks about is the need for strength and the pursuit of truth. Where when it comes to strength, Catholics always talk about masculinity, always talk about doing the hard thing, even doing the hard thing, even when it's the right thing, and being honest and following wherever the evidence goes. And I think if you're somebody who's interested in questioning the church, leaving the church is going to be a much harder thing than it is to stay in the church, and to question your beliefs and to really reevaluate them and come to new conclusions on a myriad of different topics is going to be much more work, and much more strenuous work, and much more emotional work than just staying inside of your bubble. But if you want to talk about strength, you want to talk about masculinity, you want to talk about intellectual honesty, I think that the strong thing to do is to do your own research and to read a number of different sources to come to your own conclusions, and to be honest with yourself, and to stop lying with yourself and taking the easy route out, which is, well, I'm just going to have faith and not question things. I'm going to not investigate. I'm just going to do what the church teaches. I'm going to be a good boy and just fall in line and not think for myself. I think not
Yeah.
thinking for yourself is a sign of weakness. And so when people talk about strength, I'd say, if you want to be strong, like, consider reinventing your life and doing the hard thing, even if it's right, instead of being a coward and hiding behind your beliefs.
Yeah. Exactly. That's a great response, and yeah, you're right. That there's a faux kind of pathetic caricature of masculinity that they, and I don't even care. Like, you know, for all the times people online on comments have called me beta or whatever or something like that. Like that whole kind of structure of like the alpha male, beta male. It's just, we're so beyond that. It's so meaningless now today. We're not cavemen. We're not hunter gatherers. That kind of, that kind of pure aggression, that kind of, protects the family, protect the homestead, uh, kill the invaders, hunt for animals. That is that may have been a very necessary element for in terms of masculine in terms of early human development. Um, but I think of human history as and compare as a sort of an extension of the individual human's life, because when you grow up, you learn more, you educate yourself, you build up a structure, a framework around you based on how you interpret information, how you experience the world, how you see the world. Um, but this is, again, like I said before, it's like in terms of the totality of human history, it's like the mindset of an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old, just frozen in time. Like it's like if an 8-year-old is some 8-year-old or 9-year-old decides this is how it is, and that's it. And growing up, you're gonna learn a lot. Like yeah. It's just a fact that girls are smelly, and it's just a fact that Santa's real, and it's just blah 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 blah. And then you're gonna grow up, and any attempt to hold on to that framework you had at that age is going to just ultimately destroy your life. And again, it's a young, in terms of our, as humans, it's a young worldview that is trying to force itself to remain when, again, life is change, life is movement. We observe nature, like the idea that homosexuality is unnatural or whatever, right? It's been observed in lions, penguins, giraffes, horses. It's been observed with all kinds of animals. And monogamy is also not uh, something that's natural. That you see in the animal kingdom. Animals' sexuality is all over the place. It's very varied, and humans is too, of course. But so I guess you're absolutely right with everything about it. It's you need strength is growing. You gain strength by growing up. You gain strength by building off of what came before, off of building that structure around your life. So, but the structure of that these people that traditional Catholics, high control groups. I've started to say high control groups instead of cult. I think it's just a more precise way to say it. Is there what you said was good, but what way? Because ultimately, I just stopped seeing this. Um, I stopped filtering everything, all the information I was getting as good for me or as meant to help me when I started to see contradictions even within what the Tradcath's priests were saying. I'd go to confession with Wolf, the priest who hurt me, and he'd tell me to, physically hurt myself and to be in a constant mode of fighting and everything with my thoughts. And there was another priest there, Thomas Langlois, who, when I go to confession with him, he'd say, okay, he had the complete opposite approach to battling, conquering sexual thoughts. He said, if I tell you not to think about pickup trucks, what are you going to think of? Pickup trucks. So you had if a thought enters your head, he was like, it's going to happen. Just acknowledge it's there, and don't run with it. I guess we're saying still shitty advice, but he was coming at it from a much more look. This is how we are. You're a 14-year-old goddamn boy. You're going to have these thoughts, these urges, and they're not. You're not going to do any. He had that while still maintaining, of course, it's still sinful to indulge in them and all that. He ultimately had an affair with a married woman and was kicked out of the priesthood. And Wolf, I've said before, was suspended for other reasons. And for anyone in the comments still defending Wolf, I just want to make it clear that the FF I went through a whole thing with the FSSP. They think his behavior was shitty too. Okay, they don't like him. They're not laicizing him. I wish they would, but he is like permanently suspended from all information I can tell. So um, he has no defenders even within his own. Well, he has defenders online, but not within the FSSP. Um, they don't like him from all the conversations I had. So, but anyway, is your appeal to strength is good. Is there any other way you could appeal to getting someone to overcome their? Because when I started to see the contradictions between the approaches, I started to realize that this wasn't coherent. And is there a way you could any advice you could give to someone who is struggling with that emotional attachment, who is struggling with that comfort, that loss of security? Because we can have all the strength in the world, but if we're out alone in the wilderness, psychologically speaking, spiritually speaking, um, we need to have something. And I've thought so much about this. Is like, is there is there any kind of like fitting substitute that anyone could reach for right out of the gate? Anything that could fill that hole in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to leaving a religion, I like to think of the Indiana Jones scene where he has like the gold idol that's on the scale, and then he's got the bag of sand right here, and then he tries to swap them out so that the
Yeah,
scale basically feels the same amount of weight. Um, Now, obviously, he's not successful, but I think to be successful, and I think any psychologist is going to look at any behavior that you do and ask, like, what do you get from it? Whether it's a good habit or a bad habit or something you do all the time or something you do occasionally, it's like, what is this thing that you do? What does it get you? And in traditional Catholicism, when we talk about belonging, when we have a sense of direction, when we have a sense of truth about the world, a sense of, well, I'm on the right team, a sense of I'm making the world a better place, a way and a framework to understand yourself, how to do relationships, how to do marriage, how to do everything in life. Catholicism orients your entire life, and there's not a single aspect of your life that isn't affected by traditional Catholicism. So I think the question is to like really reflect on like, what is it that you like about traditional Catholicism, that you wish you could have those same things, but without, let's say, the baggage or the abuse or the things you don't want. For me, the easiest substitute was the ultra running community. So ultra marathons, anything like 50 miles and up. I've done races up to 100 miles, help people through 250-mile races. And I like to say that like running is my new religion, in that the sense of community that I found in religion, I found just as much in the ultra running community. I think a critique of secular friendships is that they tend to be shallow, or they tend to not have a ton of connection. But in ultra running, like there's very few people on planet Earth that you would run in the middle of the woods with at 2 a.m. puking your guts out. Like that's a level of commitment to friends that like you don't have going to the bar
Right.
afterwards, or a sense of purpose or direction or self actualization. I think that drive in traditional Catholicism to be better, to become a saint, to become the best version of yourself, I found that and more in the ultra running community, where it takes a special type of crazy, a special type of wanting to improve, to go run 250 miles out in the middle of the desert and push through immense pain. Like it takes a certain sort of
Right.
spark or a certain sense of purpose, a certain sense of I know the world's going to be better and I'm going to be better on the other side,
Right.
pushing that there. I think a sense of like daily living, when it comes to training for big races, when it comes to health, in the training process, to have these sacraments where you're going on retreat from the modern world and away deep into the mountains or deep into the desert, away from civilization. I found going away into the mountains for these big races to be very similar to going on retreats. And so, especially like
Yeah.
the easiest substitute was ultra running, which a lot of people will also accuse of having like mini cults within it of people that strictly adhere to certain things. Now, the difference in ultra running is that you can leave with your dignity intact and you don't get told you're going to be sent to hell.
Yeah.
The easiest substitute for me was ultra running, and found it to be a much more enjoyable community, have a deeper sense of purpose, have a better way of living life than all of the things that I liked in traditional Catholicism.
Right. I We couldn't just say to someone, "Oh, we'll just find another community," because how many communities out there are answering all the questions of life for you, or
Yeah.
are putting your are telling you what's going to happen after you die, are quieting all the existential angst that you deal with. Like that's the benefit. Is that angst about about where you're going to end up after you die, fear of death, fear of it all just ending. I mean, I personally have really, I think for the most part, I can peacefully accept the idea that it'll just be lights out when I die, because that's just what makes the most sense to me, based on like looking around at the world and seeing how things work. I can't think of any other thing that'll happen. But there's still just a twinge of like, really? Like it's just that's it? Really? Like that's just a tinge in my head, and it's unpleasant at times. But what you said about ultimate running, I think is so good because it's endurance based. Um, Life is there. Nobody in life is unless you're like born in a prince or something, but even being in a royal, there's still pressures too. You're in a fishbowl. You have no one you'll meet will ever have come close to understanding your experience of life if you're like grew up in that kind of privilege. So there's all kinds of things, but everyone has to overcome something to get what they want. Everyone has to, some more than others, of course, work and um, go through blood, sweat, and tears because of the limited amount of resources on this planet, because of just the way the world is structured, and with currency and everything. We have to work to get what we want. That's just the basic fact of life. But I've said this before, groups like this hijack that to the spiritual world, and it's like God, life is an obstacle course to prove you're worthy of joining God in heaven. And when the balance is so skewed of like puny little humans in this almighty God, that quid pro quo kind of relationship is just completely nonsensical to me. It'd be like having me doing a business deal or signing a contract with an ant colony or anything like that. It's just it doesn't work that way. But what gives that people that grounding, I think, that sense of accomplishment and that sense of being part of something bigger than themselves, is the experience of doing something somewhat difficult, grueling, and seeing the benefits of it. And we're both in the entertainment world, and making movies sucks. But it's awesome to sit with a group of people and watch all this, and to experience this with other people who are seeing this and everything. That's such a rewarding feeling. And yeah, for me, just artistic expression in general, be it writing, be it acting, be it I want to get more into filmmaking too. All of that stuff is, for me, the thing that orients me the most, and makes me feel like I'm on the right path the most in life, is creative expression. Because I've got I've you know my mind is a storm, and it gets exhausting at times. And for me, getting so many of the thoughts in my head and the feelings that I've had out there in a way that people can understand it. Um, that's I don't know if I'll ever. Who knows if I'll ever get to the point where I've like I got there and made it. I don't think I ever will, because again, life's a journey. It's constantly changing. But that's my orientation now, and I think that what you said about running and endurance and stuff, that's the important aspect. Because joining joining a Star Wars fan group, or a cosplay group, is not going to. You'll have community, you'll have friends, but you're going to go home at night, and you're still going to be facing that existential those questions at the end of the day. And there'll be, if and it's still, for me, I have sort of a deep disappointment that that loving voice, that connection I could have to that I felt when I was deep in prayer, or in church with my family. I realize now that was just an extension of the love I had for my parents and my immediate family. They were saying, well, all the good things comes from God. And so, but I realize now that the love I thought I had for God, and what I was, the feelings I had for him, was really just for my family, and all that. And so I say that to make the point that, again, separating yourself from this structure, this group, will is deeply can be deeply unsettling, and put you out to sea. But again, strength, thinking for yourself, analyzing the evidence, not submitting to just a blanket dogmatic authority, that empowers you. That um makes, when you're empowered and you're happy, that you radiate that around to everyone else. That just makes the world a better place. And so we're coming up on an hour now, and I know you said that you wanted to keep that in that block. So let me just close by asking you a few final thoughts. What is your personal message to any kid, maybe even young adult, although the adults would be in an easier position to leave. Any kid who's growing up in maybe a traditional Catholic homeschooling co-op, or just in the traditional Catholic aura or something like that. I didn't have neither one of us had people like us to say these things when I was in high school. So if there's any high schoolers or younger watching this, what would be your message for them? What would you say to them to say, hey, you're going through some bullshit right now, and you might not even realize it, but you might understand it on a deep level. But what would be your first advice for them?
Yeah. I think one of the things that keeps people in religion is Pascal's wager. It's often not used in formal debates, but it's used in a lot of informal settings when people begin to doubt. Is like, would you rather live your life as if God exists? You get to the end of your life and it's lights out and nothing, you don't really lose anything, versus you live your life as God, as if God didn't exist. You get to the end of your life and then you figure out He does exist and you go to hell forever. Um, I think we forget to realize that if this is the one and only life that you have to live, the biggest tragedy in life, perhaps even more tragic than eternal damnation, is to live your life not on your own terms, to live your life by other people's expectations, by other people's beliefs, and to throw away the entirety of your human experience and your one and only human experience for something that doesn't exist, namely the afterlife. And I've talked to a lot of people who've left religion, and the common theme isn't, I wish I could go back. The common theme isn't, I wish I could have been more moderate. The common theme is that I grieve the fact that I missed out on so much of life because I lived according to other people's expectations. And I think that's especially more relevant to people in the LGBT community, where I've talked to people in their 70s who have came out, and people in their 60s and their
Mm,
40s, and myself at 21. And even only missing my teenage years, the amount of regret and the amount of grief of like, hey, I could have lived my life perfectly happy, perfectly healthy on my own terms and gotten to live life. Um, I only missed out on a few years, and that's enough to make me want to make sure nobody else goes through that. But imagine you go through your whole life according to church teaching, following what the church lays out in these toxic, abusive groups, and not getting to experience things. And you turn 50 and realize you threw away 2/3 of your life or half of your life for nothing. If God does not exist and you live your life according to this high control group, you lose everything. Your one and only shot to live life.
yeah,
And I think that is
yeah,
absurd. I think that is regretful. I think that is shameful. I don't think that being honest with whatever divine power is up there, actually doing research, coming to your own conclusions and going, this is what makes sense to me. I don't know, God, what else you want me to do? This makes sense. I'm trying my hardest here. I'm not leaving because I want to sin. I'm leaving because I don't see evidence. I don't know how we get to the end of our lives when we're genuinely convinced of something, being a genuinely good person and trying to live life, and we get to the end and God's like, I know you tried. I know you were being honest, but that wasn't good enough and you're going to be burned for forever.
yeah,
I think that
yeah.
is
You
absurd.
masturbated. So sorry. Yeah, yeah. That
Yeah.
kind of yeah,
You could live a perfectly holy life your entire life. You do that at the end, burn for forever. A dictator or
right.
somebody committing genocide could do terrible things their entire life and repent
Yeah.
right before the end. Um,
Here's why
I think,
Pascal's
yeah.
wager is. I just want to say, here's why Pascal's
Mhm.
wager is bullshit. It totally. If that's a correct framework of what God would even want to put you in that position, a loving God of like it turns God into Ed Harris from the Truman Show, where Truman lives his. For anyone who hasn't seen that movie, I'm sure you have, but Jim Carrey plays a guy who's in a fake world and he doesn't know it. The movie is about him slowly realizing that everything around him is fake. It's all a TV set, and his life is being broadcast on TV. And when at the very end, spoilers, at the very end, Ed Harris, who's this guy who's been running this whole thing, talks to Truman and invites him to stay and explains, and he tries to present himself as this, uh, loving presence. Like, I watched you when you took your first step. I was there the whole time. And it's almost it's like a voice coming from the sky, and it's like clouds around him. It's very much meant to evoke like Truman is like listening to the voice of God talking to him, but he turns around and leaves. And that's exactly what Pascal's wager turns God into. He's not there for you. He's not really present. He's not really speaking to you because you have to. Again, I'd say in confession, I'm having doubts. Well, God loves you. Talk to God, or be receptive. Get in prayer and everything. Really trying to build up this the fact that the idea that God's watching you. You're being supervised. You're not alone here. But if that were to be God's final message, like I was here for you the whole time, I'd be like, no, you weren't. Like you weren't. other people saying like I didn't hear your voice. Other people are saying here's what he said. It's all third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand filtered bullshit from 2,000 years ago. That's not presence, you know. And and so that's the final point I have here. And my message for anyone watching is your journey is your own journey. And I don't know the specifics of your life and how you would do what decisions you would make would lead to what, but you know the you living your best life is not selfish, is not like prideful. I'm trying to use buzzwords that the Tradcast use
Yeah.
because you don't can't give what you don't have. And if you're not completely fulfilled, if you're not completely um you know comfortable and safe in your own identity and your own sexuality, you're not going to be a person capable of having the kind of good impact you want to have on the world. You're an incomplete person if you're constantly suppressing your biological nature. And so, yeah, that would be my final message to anyone watching. Any last words, Cade? Thank you so much for coming
Yeah.
on. I'll link to Cade's channels. Please check him out. Any last messages, Cade?
Yeah, I think what a lot of people talk about in traditional Catholicism is the four last things. And I like to think one day we're all going to die. For some of us, we'll know that day. For some of us, we won't. But I would hate to picture myself at 80 or 90 with a week or two left to live and realize that I threw away all of my teenage years to spend all of my time in a church, to not have friends where I could just be friends with people without judging them, without trying to convert them, without trying to figure out, are these people going to lead me to hell? I would hate to have married somebody because God told me and not because I actually wanted to be with them. I would hate to have lived a life in which God dictated how many children I had, under what conditions, even if I couldn't afford them, to be locked into a contract with 12 kids. I would hate to have approached my career and how I lived my life of what God wants and have been given away my actual career aspirations in order to not sin. I would hate to have lived my life to only have friends from a particular hateful group, from people that all they cared about was my eternal salvation. I would hate to live an entire life where I had to judge my kids, where I could only have a relationship with my kids insofar as they believe the same things that I do. I would hate to live my life and look back and realize that I perpetuated an institution that abuses children, that perpetuates hate, that is shown to have negative psychological harms. I would hate to look back on my life and realize I didn't make a single impact on people's lives, and that the only memory of me is in an institution that's decrepit, that's vapid of any amount of helping people. I would hate to be on my deathbed and realize I gave away my entire life to something that isn't actually true. And I would
Right.
rather, in those last few weeks of my life, realize that I loved my friends, that I loved my spouse, that I loved my kids as much as I possibly could without conditions, that I tried my best to leave this world a little bit better than I found it, than to make some amount of difference, some amount of legacy, some amount of something where I left this world better than I found it, instead of dictating how it is that I wanted to live life. I would rather live life and make mistakes and to change how I approach the world and to find beliefs that work with me and experience life to its fullest. I would rather think that on my deathbed than regret my entire life as a lie following religion. That's, I think, a
Absolutely.
powerful thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I loved what you said about not having your only memory of you be an institution when you die. I think that's a great line. You're the institute. You be the institution. In your own life. So thank you so much, Cade. Thank you for speaking. I hope we can do it again. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe, and I hope you fly away to victory with me.
Peace.